The average American can do very little insofar as digging communist espionage agents out of our government is concerned. They must depend upon those of us whom they send down here to man the watchtowers of the nation. The American people can do is to be vigilant day and night to make sure they don't have communists teaching the sons and daughters of America.
There's never been a communist party in the United States such as those found in Europe. At its strongest, the American Communist Party could only muster up about 100,000 members and never had any major political power or influence. McCarthyism was a logical but extreme product of the political machinery and national identity of the day. America has long feared radicalism. Society can be so swept up in this fear that its way of life or even existence can be threatened. During these times, traditional patterns of behavior and institutions are swept aside as well. Outbreaks of intolerance reveal as much about a national identity as it does about the danger to society, whether real or imagined. McCarthy did not invent the idea of fighting communism, but he quickly became the most well-known proponent. Although he never proved one person to be a Soviet sympathizer, he never had to. His torch and burn rhetoric of unsubstantiated accusations was enough to ruin the reputation of anyone who stumbled in his way. The question presents itself: if McCarthy was unsuccessful in rooting out communists, were communists the real enemy to those who followed his persuasion? McCarthy had less to say about real Soviet infiltrators than he did about those who did not live up to what he would call true American. He was not an investigator, but a labeler. He created a savage enemy by labeling those who did not live up to his expectations. Those so-called communists were the educated elite who often were associated with colleges and universities. Members of political institutions actually create identity as they govern. This is especially the case when considering McCarthy. When he categorized an American, he also categorized a non-American. An ipso facto categorization occurred. When he categorized communist sympathizers, he in effect categorized the non-communist sympathizer. These non-communist sympathizers were the true Americans in McCarthy's rhetoric.
Believe me, you communists can't keep fooling the entire world. You can't even keep fooling your own people. Because the news about communism is getting around. And it's only another word for slavery.
The fear of the Reds dated back several decades before World War II to about the turn of the century. The Socialist Party had opposed American intervention in the First World War, challenged the constitutionality of the draft, and urged the refusal of military service. This left the Socialists open to a counterattack from the right on the home front during the war.
We're living in a country that's the finest place on earth, but some folks don't appreciate this land that gave them birth. I hear that up in Washington they're having an awful fuss, 'cause communists and spies are making monkeys out of us.
The question is, have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
10 years before McCarthy even made his debut on the political stage, Texas Democrat Martin Dees chaired the Special House Committee on Un-American Activities. Starting in the late 1930s, Dees pioneered the spectrum of anti-communism mythologies and techniques that would later be referred to as McCarthyism. It was Dees who first popularized guilt by association. The HUAC also pursued a variety of liberals, socialists, and so-called fellow travelers, all of whom appeared only slightly less sinister than communists to the House Committee chair. The term McCarthyism originally appeared in a 1950 Washington Post political cartoon drawn by Herbert Bloch. The cartoon depicted 4 leading Republicans trying to push an elephant, the traditional symbol of the Republican Party, to stand on a teetering stack of 10 tar buckets, the topmost of which was labeled McCarthyism.
Republican Senator Flanders of Vermont said of McCarthy today, "He dons his war paint, he goes into his war dance, he emits his war hoops, he goes forth to battle and proudly returns with the scalp of a pink army dentist."
By the time Edward R. Murrow hosted the now famous See It Now broadcast, a report on Senator Joseph R. McCarthy, the stage was already set to paint McCarthy as an anti-American force. McCarthy had already showed his cards when he published his book, McCarthyism, The Fight for America, in 1952. As the Cold War was beginning to take form in February 1950, Joseph McCarthy warned America about the communist threat from within the government. According to McCarthy, every man and woman in America can appoint himself or herself to undo the damage done by communist infiltration of our schools and colleges through communist-minded teachers and communist-lined textbooks. Countless times I have heard parents complain that their sons and daughters were sent to college as good Americans and returned 4 years later as wild-eyed radicals. The education system in this country cannot be cleansed of communist influence by legislation. It can only be scrubbed and flushed and swept clean if the mothers and fathers and the sons and daughters of this nation individually decide to do the job. We cannot win and fight against communism if communist-minded professors are teaching your children. As the Cold War was beginning to take form in February 1950, Joseph McCarthy further warned America about the communist threat from within the government. Once again from McCarthy, and I quote, "It has not been the less fortunate or members of minority groups who have been selling this nation out, but rather those who have had all the benefits that the wealthiest nation on earth has had to offer: the finest homes, the finest college education, and the finest jobs in government can give. This is glaringly true in the State Department. There, the bright young men who are born with silver spoons in their mouths are the ones who have been the worst." McCarthy defined his view of what constituted being American by labeling what he saw as not American, mostly from those who were educated and in positions of power who lived on the East Coast, homosexual, and non-Christians. Thus, McCarthy defined the true American as being from Middle America, Christian, heterosexual, and capitalistically subservient. If you failed to live up to these values, McCarthyism dictated that you had to be a victim of some sort of foreign influence. McCarthy ultimately was unable to prove any of it.
Now I realize that the minute anyone tries to get a communist out of a college, out of a university, there will be raised the phony cry that you're interfering with academic freedom. I would like to emphasize that there is no academic freedom where a communist is concerned. He is not a free agent. He has no freedom of thought, no freedom of expression. He must take his orders from Moscow, or he will no longer be a member of the Communist Party. I may say, Mr. Jenkins, I don't care how much of a screwball or a crackpot any professor or teacher may be, as long as he or she is a free agent. But once you have this United States, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, covered with a network of professors and teachers who are getting their orders from Moscow, from an organization that wants to destroy this nation, that wants to corrupt the minds of youth, then, Mr. Jenkins, we are rapidly losing the battle.
McCarthy was indeed on a witch hunt, but he was not hunting communists. McCarthy's communist labeling campaign resulted in an extreme, if not temporary, power play. This power came from taking action against those who he believed did not represent the values of Middle America. Foucault claims power is neither given, nor exchanged, nor recovered, but rather exercised, and only exists while it's in action. Power is above all a relation of force. Foucault replaces the traditional liberal conception of power as contractually exchangeable with an agreed upon limit to that power at the end of war. Instead, Foucault contends that political power is a continuation of the war by other means. This power is an unspoken warfare, a warfare conducted by means of silent, invisible, diffused mechanisms and tactics of control, subjugation, and domination. By this theory, McCarthy's Cold War against communism could never end. Edward R. Murrow did not destroy McCarthy. No one can stake that sole claim except maybe McCarthy himself. Murrow simply explained McCarthy's tactics on television for the first time. Just before the end of the program, Murrow fixed the audience with an editorial call to action.
We must not confuse dissent with disloyalty. We must remember always that accusation is not proof, and that conviction depends upon evidence and due process of law. We will not walk in fear one of another. We will not be driven by fear into an age of unreason if we dig deep in our history and our doctrine, and remember that we are not descended from fearful men, not from men who feared to write, to speak, to associate, and to defend causes that were for the moment unpopular. This is no time for men who oppose Senator McCarthy's methods to keep silent, or for those who approve. We can deny our heritage and our history, but we cannot escape responsibility for the result. There is no way for a citizen of a republic to abdicate his responsibilities. As a nation, we have come into our full inheritance at a tender age. We proclaim ourselves, as indeed we are, the defenders of freedom wherever it continues to exist in the world. But we cannot defend freedom abroad by deserting it at home. The actions of the junior senator from Wisconsin have caused alarm and dismay amongst our allies abroad and given considerable comfort to our enemies. And whose fault is that? Not really his. He didn't create this situation of fear, he merely exploited it, and rather successfully. Cassius was right. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves.
Murrow defines being an American as one who is not afraid to speak, write, or associate with causes that are momentarily unpopular. The definition is directly traced back to the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States and the rights of speech, assembly, and petition. Murrow reminded the broadcast viewers that as Americans, we must take responsibility for our actions both domestically and abroad. Rhetorically, Murrow was calling forth American history to back up his claims that we are not a country of fear. About 10 years earlier, Roosevelt used the same terminology to seek support for the war.
This great nation will endure as it has endured, will revive and will prosper. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Whereby Murrow is saying democracy in America stands tall, McCarthy is saying they are weak and should be protected. By using stronger warrior terminology to offset McCarthy's use of protectionist terminology, Murrow sets up a dichotomy of language to show McCarthy is not one of us. For Murrow, American democracy was a mighty force the world needed to reckon with and accept. Murrow knew ideas had power, and words and images had consequences. McCarthy wanted to remove First Amendment rights to those who questioned the actions of government. Murrow was rhetorically claiming that to be an American is to be one who claims and utilizes the rights of being American. In effect, these were the times that to be an American, one must question authority. Thus, McCarthy's attempt to separate Americans into categories was a destructive force against a national identity based on history, doctrine, and law. Arthur Schlesinger Jr. claims we are creatures of our times, prisoners of experience, partisanship, prejudice, dogma, fear, and hope. Once manipulated, history becomes more like the glue that politically and socially binds us together than works of disinterested intellectual inquiry. Participants in a democratic society depend upon information in the media in order to form opinions, observations, and dissent. The search for honesty rather than meaning becomes the weapon of freedom. Society understands so much of its present from the media that the media becomes our past. As we read the past from our media, we associate that past with who we are today. Or, as Keith Jenkins said, we are the source of whatever the past means for our present. Foucault said it is important to discriminate what is said out of desire for truth and what is said out of a desire for power.
There is no remote possibility of this war which we're in today, and it's a war which we've been losing, no remote possibility of this ending except by victory or by death for this civilization.
He said, truth is linked in a circular relation with systems of power, which produce and sustain it. John Dewey said the smoothest road to controlling political conduct is by controlling opinion. As long as history is a public opinion generator, those in power have a motive for tampering with the springs of political action. This is something McCarthy knew all too well. He created a national identity he could not sustain by simply attacking who he saw as either enemies or the intellectual elite.
You better clear up the broken glass and all this debris. All in all, I'd say we've been very lucky around here. Nothing to do now but wait for orders from the authorities and relax.
The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves. Good night, and good luck.